Okay, so my screen should be up, yes? All right, so we'll get started, and good evening, everyone, and thanks for taking the time out of your evening to join us for this this chat about the Transportation Master Plan and Recreational Trails Master Plan. This public open house is covering these two master plans, followed by a second open house next week to cover some other components of the Growing Together project. You know, just some standard housekeeping items, but that we would like to go over. If you're not speaking, so remain on mute. To use the raise hand function, if you'd like to speak, we'll have a couple opportunities for Q&A throughout this evening's session. And then sometimes people encounter connection issues or maybe some laggy connection. We recommend turning off your camera in those instances, as it sometimes helps with that. Lastly, the question and comments, we'll welcome those in the chat box, which we'll be monitoring throughout the public open house, and we'll certainly take any questions or comments from there and consider them. And when we get to the Q&A, we can certainly get some answers from the project team. I'll also note that this meeting is being recorded, and a recording of the session will be posted on the project website after this evening's event, with a discussion forum available for a couple weeks to allow people to view the open house and to provide their comments at their own time. So thank you to everyone who has been able to join us this evening. So just before we dive in, I'll go over a couple introductions, and first I'll pass it over to Rob at the municipality just to say hello and introduce some staff and council.
Well, welcome to tonight's open house. It's a small but mighty group, so I'm glad. Hopefully we'll have a lot of interaction with those that are in attendance. I'd just like to recognize we have two councillors who are joining us this evening, Councillor Brennan and Councillor Flagel, as well as Mayor Vanderheyden has joined us as well. So we're glad that they can take time out of their busy schedule to listen in and participate in this open house this evening. So again, thank you for joining us, and I turn it back over to Matt.
Thanks, Rob. And then you'll meet the rest of the project teams from WSP leading the transportation master plans and the recreational trails master plans once they get to those sections of the presentation. Perhaps I neglected to introduce myself. My name is Matt Rodriguez with WSP. We're the consulting firm working with the municipality on this project, and excited to be facilitating this evening's public open house. So just a quick agenda for this evening. We'll go over just a quick update on the project. I believe everyone or most on this call are quite familiar with the project, but wanted to provide an update on the timing and the status of the project. And then we'll head into the Transportation Master Plan, and Brett and Abram from WSP will speak to some recommendations and big moves, including some network mapping. And then I'll pass it over to Amanda with WSP as well, who's leading the Recreational Trails Master Plan, and she'll provide an overview of those recommendations and other big moves. Then we'll wrap up with some conclusions and next steps. And throughout this, we'll certainly have lots of opportunity for questions and answers, and feel free to, as I said, type them in the chat box or raise your hand. So just before we get started, and this was something that we wanted to kind of get a pulse of as we start to communicate these events and get the word out. There was quite a bit of communications about this public open house, and it's helpful for us as well as the municipality's communication staff to gauge what is successful. So in a second, a little icon or a polling question will pop up on your screen, and you can select how you learned about this open house, and it's helpful for us as we go forward in this project. So I'll leave it open for a little bit. And if you have an other, you can type that in the chat box. Great to see a couple of people has learned about it through the newsletter. There was some great communications in the Hometown Strathroy publication most recently about the project, so that's great to see. Email, of course. Word of mouth is always good. Social media, there was quite a bit of social media for promoting the open house, and other, obviously, some members of council who learned about it. So with that, thank you everyone for participating. It's just helpful for us to get a pulse of how things went. Okay, and with that, and before we jump into the transportation master plan, I'm going to pass the floor briefly to my colleague Alejandro Cifuentes, the project manager for this project, just to provide a brief update on where we are in the project. Alejandro.
Thanks, Matt, and good evening again, everybody, and thank you for joining us. Thank you, members of council, for attending tonight's open house. I'll just be briefly speaking. I only have a couple slides to give everybody a little bit of a status update on the various components of the Growing Together project. As Matt mentioned, I am Alejandro Cifuentes, and I am the project manager for this project that involves a lot of not only these two components that we're going to be talking about later on, but also 8 different master plans and studies and the actual update of the official plan. So, a few months ago, we were here talking about, brainstorming about visioning, talking about guiding principles, and a lot of, good work and a lot of consultation and engagement has been happening since then. We will continue to obviously work with all these stakeholders, with members of council, with staff, and with members of the public over the next 18 months to achieve the goals and objectives of this project. The project, as I already mentioned, includes 8 different drivers or inputs that range from things such as housing-related issues, employment and retail matters, infrastructure, transportation, parks and rails, and trails. These 8 studies and master plans will help guide infrastructure and budget decisions for the municipality over the next 25 years. And they will also help to inform the technical work and the policy requirements that we will be needing and requiring as we get into writing the new official plan for the municipality. Next slide, Matt. Thank you. In terms of where we're at in the project currently, we have been covering a lot of ground, as I mentioned. The official plan review process continues to advance in the background. We've completed some background work on the official plan review line item that you see at the top. We also, for everybody's benefit, I'll provide a quick sort of like snapshot of where each of these components and studies are at the moment, as we will have a lot of recommendations and a lot of draft reports over the next coming months between now and fall of this year. So the fire station location study, for example, as well as the regional commercial system study and employment land study, they're advancing. A lot of background work has been happening. There's been some benchmarking, some assessment that's been completed, and we're expecting to receive some preliminary recommendations on those studies within the next couple of months. The attainable housing study, for example, is another big item. I know there is a lot of interest from the municipality as well from stakeholders, and we're hoping to have a draft of that study towards the end of the summer. So that's going to be very exciting, and it's going to lay the path forward for the community to address those housing attainability concerns and issues that Strathroy-Caradoc, as well as the province, really is facing right now. In terms of the servicing capacity and constraint study, there's been a lot of background and modeling work that our engineers have been conducting, and a final study and some recommendations are expected later this year, around the fall. And of course, the recreational trails master plan and the transportation master plan, as you will see later today in the presentation, that's been advancing. And I won't steal the thunder from my colleagues, but I know they have some exciting and some great recommendations for consideration tonight. All of these components will sort of like funnel through the official plan review process, and they will help guide the municipal comprehensive review process that will begin early in 2022. And obviously, the feedback that we're collecting tonight, your participation will be essential for the success of these studies, for the success of the project as a whole. And we're hoping, to get that feedback tonight and later on as we advance these different milestones. So thank you for being here tonight.
Thanks, Alejandro. And with that, I'm going to pass it to my colleagues, Brett and Abram, to walk through the Transportation Master Plan and some exciting findings to share this evening. So Brett, take it away.
Thank you very much, Matt, and good evening, everyone. I'm Brett Sears, also with WSP. I'm our team's lead on this and working with your municipal staff to prepare the Transportation Master Plan. I'm going to be joined by my colleague Abram for some of our presentation. He'll be talking about walking and cycling. I'm going to go ahead, though, and kick us off just to put a level playing field so everyone can understand like what is a transportation master plan and what it is not. So if you go to the next slide, Matt, there is some items here just so that we all can understand. This is a long-range document. We're looking toward the future. We're looking to determine how best to accommodate growth and to ensure that people can get around town. And we're looking at it from all modes of transportation. It is a living document. Alejandro was noting all the different studies currently underway in the municipality. So we're trying to leverage those, be in coordination with those. And that's why actually tonight, right after our presentation, our colleague will be speaking on the Trails Master Plan, because those two can really go hand in hand to help people travel around your community. A transportation master plan is not a detailed design for a specific project. It's not authorization to construct a specific project. Now, eventually, these projects might come to fruition, but it would be first, the council would have to allocate the funds. There might need to be additional study and design work before anything were constructed. But this is a document to guide the future of transportation in your municipality. It looks municipality-wide, so we're not necessarily looking at like a pothole on a specific street or a specific local concern. We're trying to consider municipal-wide what makes sense in terms of how people travel. In our first set or round of public consultation back in March, we were developing a transportation vision because this project is being undertaken through the municipal class environmental assessment for master plans. And if you go to the next slide, Matt, we are showing the vision. This meets, oh, I'm sorry. We're going to first, I'm sorry about that. Yeah, we're first going to talk about what we heard. Like I was saying back in March, we went through certain different rounds of engagement. We had a meeting similar to this and other meetings with some stakeholders in your community to ask some key questions and determine where are we going so that we can eventually develop a vision statement. And so you can see different questions that we were asking. And then on this slide here, you are seeing like we also had some interaction of like, okay, where do you think we can help in the future in terms of, are there challenges right now with mobility? Are there things that we should consider? Giving people the opportunity to help us identify the challenges today so that we can also be planning for the future. If you go to the next slide, please, Matt. Now we get to the vision, trying to represent the items that we heard in the past. And once again, like I've already mentioned, talking about all modes of transportation and trying to also provide access to those sustainable modes of travel, be it through walking and cycling, addressing transit on a high level, also trying to coordinate that with the trails network, and really designing for a complete street, which is the idea that the street network should be designed for all modes of transportation and all transportation system users. Doesn't mean a bus is going to go down every street, but we need to be able to have a network that works together between the different modes and have some recommendations for the point number 4 that the municipality can implement in due course. If you can go to the next slide, please, Matt. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to Abram. We like to set up our presentations to address the most vulnerable road user first, and so that's why we're going to be talking about walking and cycling. After Abram finishes, I'll come back to talk about transit and the road network, and then we'll be happy to take your questions at the end of our presentation. Abram?
Yeah, thanks a lot, Brett. I appreciate the introduction. Yeah, so as mentioned, I'm a member of the team here, and I've been dealing specifically with some of the active transportation recommendations that we've been developing for the municipality. Active transportation, I guess, to avoid any confusion, is sort of broadly defined as human-powered forms of transportation. So the most common, of course, being walking and cycling, but that extends to people who use mobility devices, scooters, rollerblades, any sort of form of movement that is powered, by ourselves, by our own bodies. So to begin, I think whenever we look at any sort of mode of transportation, we want to look at some of the existing conditions, both to understand the context that we're working in, and also see, past investments, past momentum that we can seize in our approach to identifying and developing new recommendations. So on the map here, or on the slide, sorry, you have 3 different maps that show some of the key existing conditions, physical conditions that we looked at. The first of which is the existing on-road network. So those are facilities that are within the roads themselves, adjacent to which are the trails network. So trail systems locally within the settlement areas, as well as within the conservation areas. And then finally, the planned Middlesex County cycling network was something we also considered, which was an initiative taken by the county that looked at a number of program recommendations, but also network recommendations of where cycling facilities would be best implemented, in various parts of the county, but Strathroy-Caradoc as well. So if you want to get to the next slide. So this here is just detailing the approach that we followed in developing our active transportation network and some of our recommendations. So we've outlined it into 5 different steps, and at this point, we're at the end of the 3rd step. So to go through each one of them, the first is identifying existing conditions. So that's something that we talked about, just on the past slide, looking at the physical conditions in terms of existing facilities, but also looking at the sort of intangible ones, policy items, some of the conditions in terms of the physical context of the different sites to understand, what works within certain roadways, what works within certain contexts. Moving on, we look at the second step, which is developing selection criteria. So that's sort of our way of translating, our understanding of the local context, our understanding of what the priorities are for this project into a series of principles that then guide our approach to identifying different recommendations. So you can see listed below there what the different criteria are: connectivity and directness, access and potential use, user safety and comfort, cost and feasibility, tourism, on and off-road integration, and local demand. And finally, the 3rd step is starting to sort of formulate a candidate network of, what the future of active transportation can look like on a map in the municipality, and also what it can look like from a policy perspective. So what are some policy items, programs, and things that we can recommend to advance active transportation objectives within the municipality? So if you want to get to the next slide. So this here just details some of the recommendations that we're listing. We've categorized them into 3 different types. The first of which is the network, which is obviously a big part of it. When people consider active transportation, obviously a big determinant of that is the provision of facilities that allow them to travel safely and comfortably. So our key recommendation, of course, and that would be to recommend the network that we are proposing. In addition to which, we've identified 2 different locations that are ideal for pedestrian crossings. These were based off of public feedback we got and confirmation through our own technical review. And those 2 sites are Glendon Street and Bond Street and Adelaide Lions Park Drive, both of which are in Mount Bridges. And then our final network recommendation is implementing rail guards at grade level crossings where there are active transportation routes. So that's sort of a treatment you can apply to the road that helps with cyclists and pedestrians who cross over the roadway. Other recommendations, so policy-wise, we're looking at the adoption of a paved shoulder policy. So that would be something with every road rehabilitation project. We would pursue opportunities to build new paved shoulders and other active transportation facilities, and also the consideration of an e-scooter bylaw pilot to give people more ways to try active transportation and make it more accessible. Finally, the program recommendations, the first of which would be to implement an annual Complete Streets event in downtown Strathroy. Complete Streets, for those unfamiliar, are annual events that happen where a main street is essentially closed off for motor traffic, and residents, visitors alike are invited to sort of reclaim the streets. Typically, there's a lot of recreational events. It's sort of a fun kind of fanfare. And additionally, we're also advising that maintenance standards for active transportation routes be aligned with the minimum maintenance standards for municipal highways. That is a best practice here within Ontario. and it would ensure that the facilities are, maintained at a well state of repair, so that they can extend their life use and also remain, safe and comfortable facilities to use for, active transportation travelers in the municipality. So next slide. So, so the next slides are just going to show you the different network maps that we've developed. I'm not going to go into too much detail into these because I could reference specific facilities and things, but we will be posting these maps online. Matt, you can correct me if that is true, right? We'll be posting these online for people to comment on.
Yep, a copy of this presentation will be available and is available already online.
Perfect. Yeah. So just to kind of show you though what we've come up with, you can see in the legend there, we have the existing routes, existing trails, but then we also have some proposed facilities. So the Middlesex County cycling strategy was one. We have some proposed connections and also some conceptual trail alignments, which Amanda will get into more detail when talking about the Trails Master Plan. So if you want to go to the next slide. Perfect. So same thing. This is just a map within the area of Strathroy. Similarly, a lot of facilities, same types there on the legend. And then if you just want to go to the last slide, or sorry, next slide. Same thing within the extent of Mount Bridges. So I won't go into too much detail because we will be revisiting a lot of this with the Trails Master Plan, but just to kind of give you a sense of what we've come up with so far from a network perspective. And so here is just a slide basically detailing some design guidance. So when looking at the facilities, there are a range of different types that you can select from based off context. At this stage in the process, we haven't finalized facility types for different routes. We've merely just identified where we want to build routes. And through additional technical work, we will finalize an appropriate facility type. Next slide. All right, and I'm going to pass it back to Brett, who's going to be talking about transit, which is another key mode that we're considering in our TMP. So,
thank you, Abram. Similar to what we did for active transportation and all of our different analyses, we want to have a transparent, data-driven process that is a step-by-step to really look at, okay, where are we today? What do we know about best practice other places? And then how do we come up with identifying those challenges and then determining what do we recommend that's going to be suitable for Strathroy-Caradoc for the local context. And so we wanted to do this. We've already done that now for walking and cycling and just active transportation. And now we're moving on to transit. And so even though we've all been in this pandemic, things have continued forward. And on the next slide, we're just talking about some of the existing conditions for transit. And during the pandemic, there has been a pilot project that has been launched with the funding from the Ministry of Transportation. And that has allowed, there's a stop in, there, thank you. There's a stop in Strathroy, a stop in Mount Bridges, and you can go all the way to Sarnia to the west, you can go to London to the east, and we've found that analyzing the data that a good percentage of the people using this service are actually getting on or off at Strathroy or Mount Bridges, looking at the data from when it started in August through April of this year. There also is via rail, just one train going eastbound, going westbound. So there are these items on the ground today. And the question is, well, what else would we do? And do we think that there would need to be like a local service for transit, like a local bus in the municipality? Or as we look to the future, what does the future hold? And so we are suggesting if the municipality wanted to pursue additional transit, they try something nimble like on-demand transit. So this provides a number of different benefits in terms of flexible routes. No one likes to see the bus operating empty. So this provides an opportunity, okay, where is the demand and can we provide a service for that demand to be nimble to where people are trying to go and when they're trying to go there. So it does provide an opportunity to offer a door-to-door or close to door-to-door service, and it provides to not just have very fixed times, but more flexibility about when that service is provided. There have been a couple of examples in Ontario. The most notable one has been in Innisfil, where they elected to use this type of service in lieu of some kind of a fixed route. And actually, I think it was wildly successful beyond what they originally had budgeted. And so they have had a good amount of success using something like this. Some municipalities during the pandemic actually have moved to an on-demand service to be responsive to the needs. I can think of Bradford, West Gwillimbury in that example. And also in Belleville, Belleville has a fixed route service, but also saw the benefit of providing flexibility through an on-demand transit. And so we think as a first step, that could be something that the municipality could explore. There's not the ridership to demand something that is a fixed route more than that pilot project at the moment, but there are these opportunities because we do want transit to be part of the solution. So a more flexible alternative is what we would recommend. I wanted to then move on to our analysis of the street network. And so similar to active transportation and in transit, we have tried to use a 5-step approach so that we can analyze data, so that we can look to the future and come up with solutions that are appropriate for your community. So to begin with, on the next slide, we looked at the existing traffic volumes, primarily on the county roads. I imagine it doesn't surprise any of you on the call that the highest volumes are on the road, the main road connecting Strathroy and Mount Bridges. And then in your area with a lot of commercial activity, you'll see right in Strathroy in red, that is where you're getting the highest of the volumes. And probably not surprising, but the second highest areas are those roads that are connecting to Highway 402. So we did notice this in our analysis, and I think it kind of confirms probably what the public perception is in terms of where the busiest streets are located. As part of the environmental assessment process, we wanted to analyze different scenarios for the future. So we know that the community is expected to grow in population and employment. So if the community did nothing, no investment in transportation, would that meet the future needs? And we thought, well, that's a bit of an extreme. Let's consider, like, if we were to look for road improvements, where would we want to locate those? And so on, this is our second scenario where we've identified a number of different routes. A few in the northwest part of Strathroy, a connection between Head and Queen Street, kind of in the central part of Strathroy, and then this connection from the high school on 2nd Ave down south, all the way to the southern end of Strathroy. We considered these different improvements to determine, would this meet travel demand to the year 2046? Then we looked to refine this with the next slide, which is our scenario 3, and we actually dropped some of those routes. We found that the connection of Head to Queen, it could be useful, but there are other connections in that area. And if we're trying to use the limited financial resources as prudently as we can, we thought money could be spent better elsewhere. Certainly it would be useful to have another connection toward the high school area, but that would also impact potentially the conservation area. And so we've backed away from a recommendation there between 2nd and Hickory. And then looking down just along the eastern edge of the Strathroy community, there is an opportunity to provide another road along that east edge. However, the existing development in that area is situated looking inward from that and not outward. So actually, if we put a road between Hickory and Walker's Drive, there's not very many places you could actually connect to it. So the people would be trying to serve couldn't actually get to it. So we didn't think that that would be a good use. We did see an advantage of having an extension of Jenna Drive just to get out to the main arterial road. And also, as growth is forecast in the northwest portion of Strathroy, extensions of Pennell and Dominion, should the development continue or proceed, would be beneficial. Just to the south of this map, there are some other subdivisions that could also have some roads that would be built specific if those subdivisions were constructed. I've been focusing here on Strathroy. We didn't see necessarily a reason to build additional capacity in Mount Bridges or in some of the outlying areas that are still part of the municipality. Once again, recognizing there are limited resources and how can we best position those resources to meet our future needs. If you can go to the next slide, please, Matt. So the recommendations, we're not recommending road widening or items for capacity at this point. We do see some opportunities to improve connectivity, and there would be some new road construction that would serve new subdivisions. Our opportunities for electric vehicle charging, and in terms of would the municipality install those on municipal property like town hall or community facilities. A number of different municipalities are doing that to try to help to facilitate the adoption of that type of a technology for a number of reasons, and especially also to address the environmental concerns of the emissions from transportation sources. If you can go to the next slide, please, Matt. So here is a quick poll that we want, then I think Matt will be able to put up, or we're going to put it in the chat box, and we can have a dialogue about this after our meeting as well, because I'm getting close to the end of my slides, and we can do that now or come back, or how do you want to handle it, Matt? Do you want to do that now, or you want to come back to that?
Yeah, just if anyone had any comments before we move on to some of the other recommendations, just curious, and if you're able to use the chat box, or given the size of the group this evening, we certainly hop off mute or raise your hand. And we're just looking to understand, are there any other street improvements or road improvements that might have been missed, or others that should be considered by the project team? Any thoughts on that? Okay. Well, as we mentioned earlier, we'll keep this up following this session, and certainly welcome feedback once we get to the end of Brett's presentation if you want to have a bigger conversation about transportation. So with that, Brett, I will pass it back to you.
One item that came up in our first round of consultation was about a road rail grade separation. This could be in Mount Bridges or Strathroy. We heard more in Strathroy, and so we haven't come out to say we recommend one at certain location, but we did want to go through an exercise to determine if the municipality were to proceed with something like a road rail separation, where might it be? And so we identified the 5 locations that are shown on the screen. This will require a lot of coordination. It would likely require a lot of financial means and a lot of community dialogue, because there would be some impacts. It would certainly, of course, be a benefit to have a grade separation, but at the same time, the places that might have the biggest benefit could also have some of the biggest trade-offs in terms of impacts to existing buildings or land use. And so this is one that is something that's certainly the municipality has considered, but there's not necessarily an easy solution. We have identified 5 locations that, should the municipality wish, could be studied in further detail to determine which of those would it be and what would be the costs. And the cost could be financial, could be environmental, could be just community based in terms of how that would function. But we did want to at least address this because it was brought up in the first round, and it was certainly part of something on our mind since the very inception of this project. If you can go to the next slide, please, Matt. We also have some policy recommendations. Both Abram and I have spoken about complete streets, making sure that the street network is designed for all modes of transportation and all transportation users. But we also are looking at other things just so that new developments from a transportation perspective are approached in a consistent way and people understand what the requirements are. Traffic calming is something we work in communities across Ontario, and this is a common question, a common concern about traffic calming. So we want to help the municipality just to be able to address those concerns in a consistent way. So there's several different policies that we have been looking into through the development of the Transportation Master Plan. And I already did touch on a little bit on electric mobility, just as giving people an option for if they're still driving a car, then this could have a lower environmental impact than a conventional gasoline-powered vehicle. So these are different.
Brett, I have a question on the electric mobility. It's Joanne, sorry to interrupt. We have a charging station behind the town hall, and we find that there's 2, maybe 3 vehicles that sit there all day, every other day. So it's local residents taking use of it. They were actually meant for tourism to drive people into the downtown so that they would, park there, use the energy, go for a dinner or a shop or whatever. So I'm really concerned about what, the municipality's cost to putting these stations in when I would rather see this go through the planning stages where we put in the building code that when houses are built, they put these electrical units in homes or in their garage, and not in the home, but in the garages, or that way, people are responsible for their own usage, as opposed to the municipality paying for the people that have electric cars. I know that in the future, a lot more people will have, and there may be something in place by then, but I just have a caution on that one.
And thank you for that comment. And I guess like if there's only maybe limited locations, and that might draw people. And then the question also is like, do they have to pay for that service as well? And so I'm coming to you from Markham tonight. It's starting to get cloudy again. Maybe Matt will have that thunderstorm you were mentioning. There are several locations. There's a couple of private shopping malls that have electric vehicle charging stations, but they charge your car, but they charge you a financial cost to use that, or you have to be like pre-registered. So this is one of those emerging items where maybe we don't have everything perfect today. And so we're trying to look at best practice to give your municipality good advice. But this is something that is emerging, and it might be messy as we go forward. We have the best of intentions in terms of wanting to support items that can help us address items like climate change. And so if we can reduce the greenhouse gas emissions, then that's a great benefit. But if this is only helping a couple of people or a few people, then we need to think about how do we best manage this resource so that it's not abused by just a few, for sure.
Brett, if I can just add as well to that, as part of the official plan, we can also look at policies for, say a private owner wants to install a charging station on, say, a commercial property, perhaps providing some sort of policy guidance for it, ensuring that equipment isn't, causing tripping hazards or impacting the public realm. Also speaking to, as you mentioned, speaking to the provision of, charging rough-ins in new builds, and looking at what that looks like through a policy level. So I think there's lots of different ways we can do that without committing the municipality per se to funding stations.
And I was just talking to a colleague who has put a down payment on a condo. It is in Toronto, but it was one of those where you have to buy the parking separate, and it's supposed to be ready in 2024. He went ahead and signed up for one that has electric vehicle charging station in it. So that is it's going to be his private home. And so you can see maybe that the market and the regulations are going that way.
Brett, it's Alejandro here, and I was going to say that, as part of new developments, we're starting to see more of those options where the end user, being the buyer, will pay for those charging stations in new developments. And I've seen them not only in tall rise buildings like condominiums, but also in low rise, as well as some townhouse developments. So it's something that's happening, and obviously, the municipality wouldn't be paying for those necessarily, but it's something that can be incorporated into the actual development process, as the mayor suggested.
I think we're just about at the end of the Transportation Master Plan slides, correct, Matt? Yes, so maybe before, I think we had talked previously, just before we started this meeting, that we can take a break here before we hand it over to our colleague Amanda to talk about the Recreational Trails Master Plan. If there other questions on the slides that Abram and I have presented, we would be happy to have a dialogue with you and try our best to answer them.
Thanks, Abram. Yeah, if anyone has a question, as I said, given the size of the group, feel free to just hop off mute, and we can certainly chat about any of the transportation items.
So Brett, Rob here. You mentioned a complete street event. Just, I'm not sure if the group knows or not. We've started to do those prior to the pandemic, and we referred to it as a night market, and we would have a feast on front where we'd pull dinner out of the restaurants onto the street. So something that we have started to look at and to engage in. I think in around street redesign, when we get to the point of redeveloping the downtown core with regards to its infrastructure, we may want to consider how we proceed with being able to facilitate that type of activity a little bit easier, for lack of a better term. It's a lot of work to do it now because the infrastructure is not there. But
well, that's fantastic to hear that the municipality is already taking those steps. And I think and Abram can chime in, but these are the types of things that get people comfortable, right? We get people comfortable with, hey, it's really pleasant when you get to walk or bike in the downtown. And so we're just trying to build awareness and build a level of comfort so that those types of things don't have to just be a one-off, but they'll feel comfortable using them other times as well. I'm glad to hear that municipalities are already doing that.
And Brett, I have two things. One, the Jenna Drive thing, the connection there. I think that's probably really important right now because that north end is really built up. We discussed that a number of years ago, and we're told that wasn't necessary, but I believe that maybe at this point. And I think the extension at Panel Lane and Dominion is going to be automatic anyway when that subdivision comes in, because it's just going to be needed in order just to get in and out of the subdivision. So that makes total sense. With the bike lanes and the trails, I think for sure with bike lanes, we have to have some kind of a process where we know we're not going to do it all at once. So what parts are the most important to begin with so that we actually have a beginning that can join to something else? I always say that in my own community about sidewalks. Like, I don't care where the person is developing, put the sidewalk in right away, even if it goes nowhere, because otherwise down the road, we have to put them all in. So, sooner or later, there's going to be a neighbor that has to have part of a sidewalk as well. So, to that same case with bike lanes, et cetera, like, we can wish all we want, but we have to have a plan in place actually to get it accomplished.
Yes, and thank you for that comment, because certainly part of the transportation master plan is a phased implementation. We recognize all of this cannot be done overnight, and so that's one of the things we pride ourselves in, is to be able to say, and we try to provide some flexibility, like this should be done in the next 5 years generally, or like this should be done in the next 10 years, or this would be beyond like 11 or more years, so that it is an achievable amount. And we also say generally, because we can understand that the council priorities sometimes change, but we do want to provide that framework so that you know where to start.
You kicking me out of office? What the heck?
No.
I guess if I can add one more thing, Rob, just in light of your comment around, the street design and wanting to sort of provide like a flexible design, I think that's really important. And, there are a number of municipalities that have done that recently. Obviously, they're not necessarily the same size as, an area as Strathroy, but Kitchener and London as well, they're sort of central streets. They've redesigned them with sort of a flexible design where, the gray difference between the sidewalk and the street is more level, and there are bollards that can be removed specifically for these sort of events, right? Where when people are invited to come to the street, it's a lot more accessible, rather than what you have without that, right? Which is sort of an ad hoc approach where you still have the curbs, you still have some other elements that don't really work with that. So that is actually a really important bit of feedback, and we'll certainly consider that and finalize our recommendations and seeing if we can maybe make a specific remark on considering those sort of elements in street redesigns in the core areas.
A perfect example is every Saturday morning we do a downtown Strathroy market where we put vendors on the street.
Mm-hmm.
We don't have hydro for the vendors to tie into, so strategically placing hydro panels to tie extension cords in so vendors can run fridges and stuff like that. So that is the challenge that we currently face. But when we look at our street redesign, that type of infrastructure makes it that much easier for the vendor, which then just improves the customer experience. And even in the situation that we have now in the middle of a pandemic, every Saturday we're getting 1,400 people to come to the market every Saturday morning from 8 till noon. So even during a pandemic, so that's fantastic. But I think we can improve upon that with making it easier for the vendor as well as the visitor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and a TMP obviously is not within scope to sort of recommend a specific street redesign, but certainly when we look at the policy, obviously having those items laid out, helps to sort of guide those decisions, further along when these, street reconstruction projects come up for capital construction. So,
if I may just add that some municipalities, for example, Town of Wasaga Beach, they're as part of their downtown redesign or that whole rebranding, they're starting to incorporate this complete street design to accommodate those events during the summer, to accommodate those farm markets in the weekend, and it's something that can be incorporated or implemented through policies in the official plan. Not necessarily addressing having every single detailer, but providing that framework and that those policies for municipalities consideration when doing those capital projects and when resurfacing or doing some works on those streets. So we'll take note of that, and we'll see how we can implement it through the official plan review process.
Okay, thank you, everyone. A good transportation discussion this evening so far. Not seeing anything else. Maybe we can move on to the recreational trails component of the evening. And so once I get there, pass it over to Amanda.
Hello, my name's Amanda Gebhardt, and I am a landscape architect and specializing in trail design and designing of public spaces. So what is a recreation trail master plan? So the master plan is a long-term visioning document that aligns with other policies and planning initiatives. The plan complements the transportation master plan by providing additional specifications for the municipality's existing and proposed off-road trail facilities and policies. The idea is that we're going to build on those on-road network facilities and develop an integrated active transportation system. Some of the other things that this plan will do is also recommend projects and recommend some standards. So a little bit more detail than what we will see in the transportation master plan that will guide, but it's still meant to be a high level document that will inform future projects. So shaping the process. The Trail Master Plan is being shaped by the public and stakeholder input. So the things that you've told us through previous workshops, meetings, and other discussions are what we're forming the base on our recommendations. So from what we heard from you in terms of needs is we need to form better connections between the old and new areas of development, provide some rural routes, connect Mount Bridges to Strathroy, offer trails that provide loops around communities and provide more points of access. Establish consistency in trail connections and standardized typologies. Design facilities that will better accommodate a range of users with amenities and remove barriers to use. And other important considerations. So we heard from you, and we would like to as well, maintain a natural feel and connecting with nature. That's why we're out on trails. We're not on trails because they're overly urbanized. We're out there to experience the wonderful aspects of our forests and other landscapes. And we also want to promote trails as a destination opportunity and support trails with amenities and programming. So from this, we developed a vision, and the idea is having a really strong vision that will really inform any future moves. It can always be brought back and gone, okay, here's what we're doing. So the vision is Strathroy-Caradoc trails will provide residents and visitors with the means for recreation and access to parks and natural heritage systems, regardless of their age, ability, or skill. Trails will be easy to access and foster an inclusive community that is connected to nature and connected to one another. Safety, access, and inclusivity will guide the development of trail systems in Strathroy-Caradoc into the future. And then there's some specific sort of goals that we have through that statement. And one of those, the first one, being enhanced user experience. So opportunities for supportive amenities such as wayfinding, rest areas, end of trip facilities will be prioritized to enhance the user experience. It's those little things. Foster partnerships. So explore opportunities to develop new and strengthen existing partnership to expand and maintain and provide consistency across the collective trail network. Promote access and inclusion. Trails need to be designed and built for a range of users to encourage participation and should focus on removing barriers to usage. They also, in that vein, need to appeal to a lot of users. So trails should appeal to that range of abilities and interests. The network should consist of various route types, levels of difficulty, and accommodate different modes of travel and other recreational experiences. And the last goal is connect destinations in nature. So trails should provide access to important destinations such as parks, natural areas, community centers, schools, shopping, and employment areas. Existing conditions. So we've seen your trails now in winter and summer. Summer was much more pleasurable, and you've got some beautiful trails. The things that we noticed that we would like to work on is consistency in terms of surfacing and widths of your trails. We also noticed that a little light in some amenities, so we'd like to see a little bit more consistency in some rest areas and other aspects. And we've got some gaps in the system, so it'd be really nice to create those loops, create gaps. And we also have a high concentration of trails in certain areas and not necessarily those community connectivities that we'd like to achieve. A few barriers, so a couple stairs and water. It's okay. So you do have water, and you know you have water on your trails. So approach to developing the network. So the process assumes that we are building on the existing trails founded within the municipality and that we're aligning with the transportation master plan. So first we look to identify off-road alignments to connect the communities, identify natural corridors that could support really long traversing trails. And then to supplement that, we looked at road corridors for multi-use pathways. And where that wasn't appropriate, we looked for identifying neighborhood greenways where connections could be formed using existing road corridors, existing sidewalks, and leveraging that opportunity to make the connections. So off-road trails prioritized, following with utilizing road corridors. Big moves. So we're going to leverage multi-use paths, so trails along roads and greenways, streetscape improvements, such as wayfinding, arboriculture, and other active transportation facilities to create loops to feed people into the core natural areas. We've got some really great natural heritage spines in all the communities or park infrastructure. So we want to gather people from residential and urban areas and connect them to those really amazing features. We also want to improve key streets with sidewalks and cycling facilities to enhance those existing connections and really make them a special place along the trail system. We want to leverage opportunities with those natural heritage corridors, rails, and hydro corridors to better form those connections between the communities. And to enhance trails along key corridors to reduce barriers to participation and increase seasonal use. So take those great trails you have and just tweak them a little bit so we can get a few more users on them. And then recommend policies to ensure all new residential developments include loop trails, spine trails, and frequent pass-throughs, which will facilitate the connection of residents to trail networks. So to begin our process and to really form a firm foundation, we want to develop a trails hierarchy. So the trails hierarchy will categorize the trails, and we have identified 4+ categories that we're looking at to date. So these hierarchy will identify standard widths, surfacing, and seasonal maintenance expectations. Include parameters such as frequency of rest areas, provisions for lighting or security features, and wayfinding. And will help to align conservation authorities for a seamless trail experience. Type 1. We're looking at identifying an urban multi-use path. So this is your trail that will support a really large active transportation function and will align with roadways. So this is your more urbanized trail. It's wide, it's 3 to 3.5 meters. It's either asphalt or concrete. We're seeing moderate amenities along those spaces because they are more urban areas that have amenities. And we're looking at 4-season maintenance. With that, so we don't have as many of those trails, but they are a really great asset. Type 2, a primary trail. So this has a little bit more of a recreation function, but also supports some commuting. So it's still important to have a good width and the 4-season service, but we're going to support some narrower widths with this trail, so 2.4 to 3 meters, still relatively flat slope and barrier-free travel. Looking at probably identifying 2 different surfacing types under this typology, asphalt and compacted stone dust, just to accommodate the different cross sections between more urbanized areas and park settings to when we get like along the Memorial Trail, where we want to develop some primary trail corridors, however, where asphalt may not be as appropriate. Anywhere where we're looking for the stone dust trail as a primary trail, we're going to look at reinforcing it in low-lying areas and try to create a drier trail cross-section in some of your shoulder seasons. Type 3, secondary trail. This trail will be a bit narrower. It will support larger slopes, so we'll follow the accessibility guidelines for a recreational trail, which will utilize a signage and other mechanisms to support those higher slopes where we have them. The compacted stone dust or earthen surface, again, we're going to develop and work with staff to articulate where those are appropriate. And moderate frequency use of amenities. Both the primary and secondary trails are where we're going to want to see a really standardized, consistent span of rest areas and seating areas along the trail to help people who are going to take that long trek and need a rest as you go. This trail will have more of a 3-season service. We're not looking to winter maintain these secondary trails. These are the trails you're going to go cross-country skiing on and snowshoeing on. So we want to make sure we create some really nice networks with those facilities. Then type 4, tertiary trails. These trails are your rustic experience. So these are your large slopes, the things that go down into those drainage gullies. This is your recreational escape. We're looking at either wood chip or earthen surfaces, something that's going to slow down some of those cyclists because they are in more sensitive areas, but still have that really fun experience. So low frequency of amenities because these are sort of our offshoot rustic trails, and obviously no seasonal service on these. And then the fifth typology we're looking at is the neighborhood greenway. So for these neighborhood greenways, it's something that we're working with communities in our trail master plans to develop another option when those multi-use pathways are too expensive or it's just not really appropriate. We've got some really great residential areas that don't have sidewalks. How can we make those areas really beautiful connections to these trail systems and make it distinct? So make people know that when they're on that street, this is a different street. It's got some really beautiful qualities to it, and there's wayfinding signage, additional tree planting, facilities that encourage cyclists, such as maybe speed reductions or cycle lanes, or and the addition of sidewalks. So that way we can really facilitate that movement of people in key areas and also communicate that it's a connection point and leads to a fantastic destination. Now on to our candidate trail network. So we've taken an initial stab at where we would like to see trails throughout the communities. This particular map highlights the area between. So as you can see, the blue is the off-road cycling network. And if we look up onto the screen to where you see the Highway 402, where it crosses the train tracks, somewhere in that zone, probably where we've got the little brown octagon, we're thinking of a trailhead and something that will then convey people along that hydro corridor where it bends and runs parallel to Melbourne Road. Then the on-road cycling facility will connect cyclists between the two communities majority along Christina. However, we were looking for a way to potentially link pedestrian usage off-road. So we were looking at there's a sort of a drainage wooded corridor that runs between the two communities. So we sort of followed that through the draft alignment that you see here. Obviously, this particular trail alignment passes through a lot of different private properties, following the edge of that drainage corridor. So we do want to take a look to see if that's viable, and it would definitely be a longer term project, but we do see some potential for that. So that covers the in between the communities. In terms of Strathroy, we have some key items that we're proposing around the waste management ponds. We've got towards the bottom of your screen, you'll see that sort of skirts around Carroll Street, a trail that traverses that natural heritage corridor. Keeping to the upper side, there's some existing ad hoc trails through there, and there are some alignments that are a little bit more higher up and a little drier than others. We'd like to connect into your existing cemetery and utilize those cemetery 3-meter roadways to form a part of that trail network to take you to the far side of the cemetery, where we can do a short connection into the conservation area trails that loop and then continue up. We're looking at either, this particular map shows neighborhood greenways or multi-use path, all is green, because we yet need to determine which are appropriate facilities. So all along Victoria Street, we want to propose one or the other, and to us, a multi-use pathway seems like a really good candidate along here, or at least along certain sections that don't already have sidewalks. Then looking at making some more consistent surfacing. Oop, we'll just head back. Sorry, this is a long tour. More consistent surfacing as we traverse through the park space into the conservation area lands and up through the woodlot, some additional loop trails around some of the farm fields, but looking to develop a spine through the center of that trail system that becomes your more primary style trail to convey people through the community, and then really enhance those loops throughout. Also looking at a trail connection along property adjacent to the rail corridor, and then really keying into a series of green streets or multi-use pathways to leverage those connections and collect people into the community. And then really strengthening that connection at the north side of the site to the high school and bringing people around some of those new development areas. Okay, now we can go to Mount Bridges. So in Mount Bridges, we're looking at the possibility of having a loop trail or neighborhood greenway / multi-use path around the entire community to create that loop with a rail with trail along the center to create 2 really large loops. And from those large loops, looking to enhance the Lions Park Trail through a series of woodlot trails as those properties develop, as well as with the development that's off Falconbridge Drive, and create some green streets connections into the existing park space, connect some of the schools and the community buildings. Okay. So the Recreational Trail Master Plan will make policy recommendations for the official plan and other implementation tools to help support these trails becoming a reality. So we'll identify sort of projects, potential costs, things that should be done together, and ensure that all future development will provide internal trail loops or spines that will connect to the neighborhood parks. resource service destinations, and other connections to primary trails. This includes frequent pedestrian throughways to increase that pedestrian-friendly point of access. As one thing we really noticed through some of your newer development areas is that they really block off some of those natural heritage areas and don't quite allow those pass-throughs that we like to leverage. Establish minimum design standards for developers for trails within new communities. Integrate the trail hierarchy within the official plan, give it some weight, and establish minimum maintenance standards for the existing trail network to really communicate to people certain trail types. There can be certain expectations, and it can be a really great communication tool between staff and the public when sort of managing expectations. Okay, so are there any questions about trails? And I'm sure there's lots of trails, ad hoc trails that you use every day that we might have missed, and we would love to learn more about those. I already know there's a ton of what we would call a tertiary trail that we want to map out, so that way we can start to establish which ones should remain, and if there's some that we should close to sort of help to manage that, that ecological feature of the forest. And we're also looking for places in our next sort of round that we can put trailheads and other amenities to help facilitate access for people. Okay.
Thanks so much, Amanda. Again, given the size of the group, welcome anyone to pop their hand up, use the chat box, or just hop off mute, and we can have a nice conversation.
Well, I'll start this. Amanda, it's Joanne speaking. Were you giving any consideration to McAvoy Road? I know that that joins Strathroy to Mount Burgess quite nicely. Although we are redoing the road, it's going to be quite busy, and I know that there's always then the combination of traffic and people, and that maybe is the reason why not. But you know, sometimes the closer, the easier route is not the best route. And I know if we could have started this all, 100 years ago, we put trails in first and then worry about the housing, but that's not how this works. So to go down rail lines, we don't have any. To go down hydro lines, closer to the towers, we have a real rural area, and there's lots of crops there. Like I don't know how that would even work. So that would be a detriment, not to us going through them, because that would be really cool that you would actually go through all these fields. But then our rural area is our rural area, and I'm really agriculture land needs to stay agriculture land. So that being said, I guess back to my first question.
Yes, we certainly can and look at that road, and I know we talked about it. So that would be a facility where we would put a multi-use pathway facility. We were talking earlier conversations about the user experience. It would still be a great way from A to B. We would still get to look at that lovely farmland, but we haven't shown it to date because we were just looking for something that had a little bit more character to it, which is why we started looking at that natural drainage corridor with some of the I don't want to say woodlot because they are scraggly trees, but through that space, and sort of rather than kind of cutting through farmland, sort of nipping off the sides of it. But those areas do flood. Now, in terms of the hydro corridors through farmland, it's something we have done in other areas, and it's something that has to be considered, because what ends up happening is we end up to protect that farmland as well from the users, end up fencing both sides of the trail and allowing gates for farmers to cross. So there is that footprint of crops that is no longer there. So it is a consideration for sure, and something that we need to make sure that if we do propose that, it's something that you have an appetite for.
Well, thanks, Amanda. And I'm not trying to put up any roadblocks, that's for sure, because I want to see some of this happen. But I also understand, rural roads, our drainage system is the side of the road. So that we can build out as far as we want, but then we have to deal with putting in more drainage property, and then we're taking more of farm fields. It's one of those double-edged swords. So yeah, I understand, but I just thought I'd throw it out there.
Yeah, no, looking for any ideas that we can facilitate a more pedestrian-friendly route, and I think there's going to be a lot more discussion about that in particular going forward.
And one of the questions that I'm sure Councillor Brennan probably put forward would be Victoria Street, whether we go under or over.
I think it was. You read his mind. So Amanda, do you have any thoughts on that, the Victoria Street?
And that's at the bridge to connect that trail through there, right? You know, we've been going under more and more. It's just what we're doing these days. And you know, you get that big box culvert in there. I always have concerns about sort of user safety, but there's some really great low-cost lighting products that we can. You know, it does take lighting. It takes a lot more amenities to make it work, but it's so much better overall for that connectivity and that movement. No one wants to come up and stand and push a button and cross a light. No one wants to stop for those people. So it's definitely something that we'll consider.
Well, so Amanda, just so you know, the bridge that's there on Victoria Street, there is a way to go under the bridge. You wouldn't have to put in a box culvert.
Wonderful.
However, there is other issues at hand with regards to the Conservation Authority and the hydrology that we need to get done, the studies, the engineering, and all of that. But there's already a crossing over the river. So I'm assuming that would be cheaper to pay that kind of work than it would be to install a box culvert under a river. For sure. The box culverts aren't cheap exercises, and we usually tend to go to that route when it's a really, really high traffic road. I know we've they've just done one at Major Mackenzie and Vaughan, but I don't think Victoria Street is quite at that level. So we'll explore a couple options for you to put forward, and that's something that regardless you'll have to look further into in terms of cost and viability. But we'll give you a couple options. We'll give you a high order of magnitude of cost, and then see where that goes. So you did earlier in your presentation, you mentioned trails and stuff going through private lands and so on. How does that get facilitated? Like, I can use an example now. We have, you know, kilometers of trail along the edge of a landowner's property, but she's an advocate for the trail system. So how do you suggest we go about that? Like, you make the recommendation. It's up to us to do all the legwork after that, I'm supposing, right?
Yeah. So a couple different options. You know, there's obviously those user agreements. There's property acquisition. Both have complicated. And again, if the owner isn't willing, sometimes what clients will do is utilize the natural corridors where they can. When they run into a barrier negotiating with a property owner, it will become an on-road trail facility around there until they get another agreeable owner. And it becomes a bit of a disjointed system until future land acquisition or partnerships can be formed as those owners change out. So luckily, you've got a really great grid system in your rural area. It's not crazy all over the place. So I think something like that is really realistic if we're looking to traverse those systems. And luckily, some of those trails we're starting to articulate to reduce the number of private owners along them. And by leveraging some of those drainage corridors and natural heritage systems, they tend to be less desirable areas for crop because they flood a lot. Makes them a little bit more interesting for trails, but it can make it a little bit easier to negotiate. You're not taking prime land, you're taking edge. Hopefully that was helpful.
Thanks, Amanda, and thanks for those questions. Any other questions about the trails, about transportation? We have reached sort of the end of the formal presentation, and so happy to take questions on either plan, and then we'll head into just some next steps and how to get involved as we head into the remainder of the summer and into the fall.
Well, while we leave it wide open, I'll ask Mike a couple of questions. One, did I see something on Panna Lane where there was a secondary trail or some piece on that one?
Let's go back.
Let's have a look.
Sorry, I just
I think I might have. Oh yes, I highlighted that as a green street, or so we just kind of identified it as a potential green street opportunity.
Okay, it's a great thought process there, but it's a very narrow street. There's
this is the street south of Panel Line.
I'll go through there and
yeah.
So that's beside the grocery store. Okay, I'll check that out. I guess the other question is in Mount Bridges, we're talking about transportation, and in your presentation, we did talk about roads that have to be upgraded because of development. Well, I know Rougham Road right now, that's one of the roads that's joins Park House to Falconbridge, and it has been abused and used right to the hilt right now because of, first of all, the detour, and second of all, because of all the development and the heavy trucks. So, you know, that's one that's going to need some work for sure. And if you're going to use anything down Falconbridge Drive or Christina for any kind of a trail, now might be the time to really consider if you're going to do something to upgrade Rougham, which we're going to have to do in some way, shape, or form. It's going to have to be an upgraded road because of the developments that are there. So, you know, there's opportunity as well to even maybe do more than just, you know, a regular trail. It could be something quite significant because it runs right beside the Lions Club Park there as well. So I don't know, just throwing that out there.
No, that's a good point. And then that might justify more taking it clean to Falconbridge Drive rather than stopping it short. I was just trying not to get too excited with my line work, but maybe that's an opportunity to propose big. No, thank you.
Great. Thanks so much for that, and been taking notes as we go here as to consider in next steps.
Usually I don't put input in these things because I'm waiting for the public to do it, but there's not very many public here. So I thought, here's my chance.
Tell us your hopes and dreams.
We do not have all night.
Yeah. Okay, thanks so much for that, Mayor Vanderheyden. Okay, on to next steps and staying in touch. So really appreciate this discussion. We've had some other feedback from other stakeholder groups and technical agencies over the past week, and all of this feedback is coming together to prepare the draft transportation master plan and the draft recreational trails master plan. And so that'll take everything you've seen today and really spell it out in a document, put those implementation tools, speak to the details, speak to the money, and really put that plan in place for the community to take a look at. As I mentioned earlier, and to those who might be watching this as a recording, this is a recorded open house and will be posted on the Growing Together project webpage, along with the forum discussion. So you can leave your comments, have a discussion with fellow community members, as well as view the slides and take a look at the maps in greater detail at your own speed. We're now working towards, as a next step, heading to council in August to receive input on and seek council's endorsement of the official plan review background report. And this report is now available online for review and comment. More details about this report will be presented at our second public open house, which is taking place next Tuesday at 6 p.m. Heading into the fall, once all this input's been taken into account, we'll be hosting future public meetings and other opportunities to get involved to present the draft transportation plan and draft recreational trails master plan. So certainly not your last opportunity to get involved, and we encourage you to stay in touch and connected via the Growing Together project webpage. As I mentioned, view a recording online and participate in the virtual forum over the next couple of weeks. We have a couple of reports available online related to the official plan review and the Parks and Recreation master plan. And we keep this website very up to date with the latest news, the latest opportunities to get involved, and contact information. If you have comments at any time, feel free to email the municipality at officialplan@strathroy-caradoc.ca. And you can register on the website to receive updates and to stay informed as we progress. I'll park it here in case there was any last questions, because this is officially our last slide. But thank you all for joining us this evening, and really appreciate you taking the time out of your day. So with that, I'll say thank you. And there's a link here to the project website to visit and learn more and read some of the reports and view the presentations that we've mentioned earlier. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you.